All right, so hello everybody and welcome to the Patriot 20th Anniversary Roundtable Discussion brought to you by the Culture and Heritage Museums of York County. My name is Zach Lemhouse. I'm the staff historian for the Culture and Heritage Museums. As many of you are aware, this month marks the 20th anniversary of the theatrical release of The Patriot. Many of The Patriot's most memorable scenes were filmed on location in Chester and York County, and as a result, members of the York and Chester communities have been impacted by the film in a very meaningful way. Today, I've asked some community members to join me in a behind-the-scenes discussion of The Patriot. The panelists today have all been involved with the filming of The Patriot in one way or another. Without any further delay, please let me introduce our panelists. Please help me welcome Ms. Nancy Craig. She's a member of the Culture and Heritage Commission, the governing board of the Culture and Heritage Museums of York County. Nancy prepared the historic food eaten by the characters in the film. Hey, Nancy Craig, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. How are you?
Doing very well. Next, we have Miss Glenda Price Coleman. She worked with the South Carolina Film Office location manager. She helped identify locations in Chester County suitable for filming. She also acted opposite Leon Rippey as John Billings' wife. Hey, Glenda, how are you?
Fine. How are you, Zach?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be.
Finally, we have Mr. Ed Schultz. He's the former site director at Historic Brattonsville, and Ed works now at Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia as a historic farmer there. Thanks for joining us, Ed. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. This is a really neat opportunity.
And I want to go ahead and thank each of you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today. This is going to be fairly informal. I just wanted to kind of go around the horn, so to speak, and allow you guys to share some anecdotes, some fun stories. I know that off camera, we've already shared some. I called you earlier last week to ask you to do this with me. So I know you've got some interesting stories, so no pressure. But yeah, Nancy, Craig, you wanna get us kicked off?
Well, my story is somewhat different. I was not actually in the film. I did the historic cooking. One morning, I received a phone call from Victor Zolfo, who is a site director for The Patriot, and he asked me would I like to come for an interview. They were looking for a local historic cook. And of course, I said yes. So I went out there and I said, how did you find out about me? Found out my good friend Ed Schultz had recommended me because I was doing a lot of the historic cooking at Brattonsville at that time. That's when I met the director, and he was very nice, but he was very brief. I think it was just happenstance. But most of the time I dealt with Victor, who was our site director. He told me he was looking for someone to do historic cooking. The food had to look authentic. It had to taste authentic. So luckily, I had enough foresight to grab a lot of my 18th century cookbooks, and here I went out there with 18th century cookbooks. And what he had recommended was, I want you to come back. I want you to bring samples of the food so I could taste it and look at it. And I said, fine. So when I went back, I had made some rustic bread because they had specifically requested pumpernickel bread, a rustic loaf. I said, good heavens, there was no pumpernickel flour to be found in Rock Hill at that time. So I had an overnight ship from King Arthur Bakeries in Vermont. So I went out there with my rustic bread. I made a sea pie, and I made a pumpkin pie, all in the Dutch oven. And he was impressed. He said that was going to be his lunch. And so he hired me, and I said, wonderful. And so that is my story, how I became involved.
Wow, that's quite an audition process, Nancy Craig. That's wonderful. How long have you been doing historic cooking prior to the film?
I'd say about 92 or 93, right when Ed started.
I hear you. And I think we said earlier the filming started around 99. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting, Nancy Craig. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll pitch it over to Glenda. You got any interesting stories for us? And I got you muted, Glenda. Can you unmute yourself, or I can do it? You're fine.
I will. Didn't want excess noise for you.
No, thank you.
Now, I first got involved with the Patriot when the Economic Development Director in Chester County called me, because she was relatively new and really didn't know very many locations or didn't know a whole lot about Chester County. And she called me and asked me if I could help the South Carolina Film Office location scout find some places that they wanted to film this movie that would be set during the American Revolution. And I heard from Dan Hydrick. He was a longtime scout for the South Carolina Film Office, and he came to my office. I was at the time the Chester Downtown Development Association director, and he showed up at my office and told me what he was looking for, and mainly the main thing that he had to find first if they were going to come to this area was the battlefields. And I was trying to think of large areas, large pasture areas, and he wanted rolling hills. I called my husband, and he had always said that he thought that the Darby farm that's in the northern part of Chester County looked like a battlefield. So I took Dan Hydrick up there, and he told me as soon as he rode up there and saw that, he knew that was the place. And I think they filmed part of what was the Cowpens battle there, and I think the final that I'd seen, they filmed several things there, and that was the Darby farm off of Darby Road. And after that, we went around and found all kinds of places, looking for wide open spaces and places they could do it. A friend of mine, John Lewis, was a farmer, and he had a lot of land in the area, and he showed them some places, and that's where the town of Pembroke was built, and the house, Mel Gibson's house that was built on site was at that place. And we went to a lot of different places, South Fork of Fishing Creek, and that was off of one of those areas. And we found a whole lot of the sites for the filming. In fact, I estimated one time that probably more than 50%, probably more like 60% of the film was actually in Chester County at the various locations.
Oh, wow.
But it was a lot. I mean, there's a lot of times you're looking at the film and you don't know that's in Chester County, but you know, it's, there was a lot of it that was filmed there.
That's the town of Pembroke is so fascinating to me because the facades of all those buildings were made special for the film, correct?
They were, and you know, a lot of them they were film. They were set, so they weren't made to last very long. But until recently, maybe a few years ago, there was one of the, I'm not sure it was the tavern or one of the larger buildings that they had. John kept out on his property. He used to store hay in, but it was still there. But one of the storms recently knocked it down, so I don't think there's much anything left there. I was talking to him the other day, and he told me about that. But they also built the church, you know, the church that was burned. They went into great detail when they built that. And I had appealed to them when they were about to burn the church down. I said, can't you take out some of this beautiful woodwork that you've done in here and let us keep it? You know, we put it in a museum or something. And they were going to, the pulpit that they had there, they had thought about taking it out. But at the last minute, I think it was Roland Emmerich said, no, you might be able to see that as it's burning down. You won't see it in there. And of course you didn't see any of that. But anyway, that beautiful piece of, because they had a woodworker that came in and did all of that and did some beautiful work on it. And it was just burned up.
Wow. Gosh.
I thought it was interesting on the church. When we went down there on the site, I was told that they would set the church on fire and they would film, they would review the film, they would put out the fire and set it again. And several times they did that before they actually burned the church down. I think he told me they had, when I was down there, they had already set the church on fire 4 different times. So,
Wow.
The house too, Gibson's house, or they burned that too, didn't they, Glenda?
Yes, they did, and there was some beautiful woodwork in there. I mean, most of the things that that were created, you could see in the film, but it was all hand done. It just and it was amazing to me how much detailed work they put into it to make it look period from that time, and even things that were very distant. They spent a lot of time putting a lot of work into that. I do know that if you remember the scene where the little boy is painting the soldiers, the pewter soldiers,
Yeah.
that gets killed, they actually had to reshoot that scene, and they built that room at the old armory here in downtown Chester. And that's what they actually did, because they had filmed it once, but something was wrong with it. So they had already, I'm not sure why they couldn't go back up there and refilm it there. I know it was raining the day that they did it, but they rebuilt the set in the armory in Chester and did that scene where he was painting the soldiers again.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, and you may not know, Glenda, but I'll ask you. And unfortunately, it looked like John Lewis tried to jump on earlier and was maybe having some technical difficulty. I may catch up with him after this, and I can edit it together. But do you know how many buildings in the town of Pembroke were more than just a exterior? Because I know they use movie magic. For example, I think the general store, the characters walk in the exterior that was built on John Lewis's place, but then they're inside the Colonel William Bratton house at our place in McConnell, South Carolina. So they use movie magic to kind of complete the transition from outside to inside.
The tavern was fairly well. They had a lot of that built. Also, the house where I was trying to remember his name. The father who couldn't hear well with the hearing, the daughter that was Heath Ledger's love interest.
Right.
That had a lot of detail in it as well.
Howard, that's the name we're trying to think of. Howard. Anne Howard was the character.
Right.
Howard's house. Yeah.
And that had a lot of detail in it as well. One of the stories that I like to tell in connection with when I was out there as an extra, being Leon Rippey's wife, that the girl that was playing Anne had left, and they needed to reshoot the scene where she and Heath Ledger are talking to each other. She's standing inside the door, and he's, I think it's right before the whole bundling thing maybe, but they needed somebody to look for him to look at. Well, I was the only person still on set in period costume, so here's Heath Ledger, who's probably young enough at that time to be my son. But anyway, I had to stand there and be Anne while he talked to me.
Wow. Heath Ledger gazed lovingly into your eyes, Glenda. That's awesome.
So they were shooting all of his scenes, so they were all shooting toward him. But they needed somebody there for him to look at. So I got to do that.
And not everybody gets an opportunity like that, I tell you what.
Let me tell you something about Heath Ledger, though, and his acting ability. He was just getting started out. And, he did some night movie or something like that. He was the unaccomplished actor. And I remember him in a scene at Brattonsville, and a production assistant saying his lines and then him repeating them.
Wow.
This is an Oscar later on, but he was just starting out.
Yeah.
He really
was quite impressive.
And he was very nervous. I mean, I saw a lot at Brattonsville. He was very nervous around Gibson. Remember that scene when inside the homestead, it was inside the homestead house where they're yelling at each other, you know, and he says, "You're my son." You remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. I was right outside the building, and I could hear them yelling in there. You didn't really know what they were saying, but you knew it was a passionate scene. But right before they walked into the house, Heath Ledger walked into the house, that man was almost shaking.
Awesome.
When he went into there. He was like almost, I think maybe mumbling to himself as he walked up those steps into that room. And here was the best part, okay? So, you know, they're yelling and there's, you know, all this tension, and everybody was on edge because I guess it was an important scene. And then Mel Gibson opens the front door of the homestead house, and he sticks his head out and makes a funny face at everybody. And everybody just relaxed. He was like that. He was funny, but he was a pro. Everybody knew it. He was very much a pro.
Let's take a moment to welcome John Lewis. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. Sorry it took me so long to get on. It's not one of my
And you're
strong suits.
fine. So Glenda was just telling us, John, that a lot of the film, especially like the town of Pembroke, was filmed on your property. Is that correct?
Yes, that Mel's house was on our property. Fort Carolina was on our property, and then at the end of the movie, the camera angle on it, and Yorktown was on our property, which same location as Fort Carolina was in.
Wow, that's fascinating, John. We're like I said earlier, we're just going around the horn, kind of each sharing a fun anecdote or story. We can talk as long as we want. Ed just finished telling us an anecdote about Heath Ledger and Mel Gibson. You got something else you want to share with us, Ed? And we'll give John a chance to think, and then we'll jump back. We'll jump back to you, John. How's that sound?
That's fine, whatever.
Well, Zach, I got a whole lot, but
yeah, I know you do. You showed me your notes.
I mean, I didn't think I remembered much about it because, you know, you hadn't thought about it for so long. But I mean, my oldest son William's a film student, and my youngest son is going to go into living history museums, and so we watched the movie, and it kind of came back. So, I mean, I just whipped out 10 pages of just little anecdotes. But I had two things. I mean, one, I was the site director of Brattonsville, and so I had a lot of connection with the film. In fact, I was sitting at the table when with Roland Emmerich and all the others, you know, hot shots of the production crew, and I had a chat with Roland about old trucks, because you remember that old green truck I had, Nancy?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, just about old trucks, and he had one. I bet it was a little better than mine, but he was a nice man. So I was there, and I helped. Remember Kirk Petricelli? He was the set designer guy. Yeah, you remember. And he would call me up, say, "Hey, well, you know, what about this or what about that?" I remember one. It was August, and he said, "Where do I get corn plants?" And I said, "Well, I mentioned some farmer." I said, "Well, maybe you can go and dig them up." And he did. They went and dug up corn plants in August.
Was it for the scene at Mel Gibson's house, that opening scene called the corn?
I
Like
remember
the
seeing
opening
them do
scene
that.
where people are picking corn, that was dug up and put there. And then in the background, some kind of grass, and I forgot. I told them what kind of grass to plant. This was like in June or July to get ready for. They wanted like a wheat field, right? In June, and the wheat's already cut. But things like that. I was there during the filming at Brattonsville. In fact, I got a file right here. I have the contract here, not filled out. you might want this, Zach, for your archival stuff. And
Hey,
it's
that's
marked
neat, yeah.
confidential. But I was part of that leadership team, right? And then the other part I had was as a extra as well. I mean, this was exciting times, and they were paying $115 a day for a 14-hour day. And I thought, I had a young family, you know, so I did a lot of work. I can't remember how many days, but enough to buy a reproduction flintlock rifle.
Wow.
So it was, you know, probably 25 days or so, something like that. But I showed up in the film in that, both parts, as a reenactor. I walk across, not a reenactor, but as an extra, I walk across the film and scene where right after the Battle of Camden, where they're, you know, sawing limbs off and stuff like that.
It's filmed right there behind the Homestead House, behind the Assembly Hall, correct? That's
Yes, it's back by what we used to call the Turkey Barn. Rusty Robinson and I built that building back there. But yeah, I walked across the screen, and that was a gift from somebody. I can't place a name of somebody. He knew it was going to be a camera shot, right? And I was an extra, and he said, "Ed, come here. I want to stand right there and walk across." And I think I saw that as a gift for all the work that I did. You know, I came free, you know, with the site and all the work I did, and I went out of the way to help these guys because it was the right thing to do. I saw it as a gift. But so that was a neat part.
That's neat.
John was in the movie briefly too.
Really?
John, what scenes were you in, John?
I don't know what if you got to see me, and I told you on the phone the other day that you actually had to pause it at the right place. It's when Mel was meeting with the storekeeper in Pembroke, and I am behind one of them's shoulder adjusting the harness on the horse. And if you'll stop it at the right spot, you can see it's me. If you just slow motion it, you'll never know it's me. I did drive the wagon some. I drove the wagons at Brattonfield, and one time when the troops were leaving Pembroke, I was driving the wagon then, and maybe another time somewhere, I don't remember. But I was in, but I was more watching from the side than anything. But it's great.
Well, now, Glenda, you get a whole face shot, don't you?
I did. I'll tell you what, I ended up, like I said, we're telling you earlier, they wanted people with red hair, and I was talking to the casting director. Somehow I don't even remember why I was up there. It had something to do with the locations that I was working at, and I was in Rock Hill, and I was talking to the casting director, and she said, "You've got red hair. You need to send your picture in. We've got to find somebody with red hair." So I said, all right. I'd done a few other things, you know, so I sent a picture in and a resume, and she said, "We don't have many people from Chester either." So I sent in my children's pictures, and I was appealing to my family and whoever I could to send some in. I happened to be at a conference in Greenville, and I got a call from the casting director and said, "Roland Emmerich wants to see you tomorrow."
Ooh.
And I had to leave Greenville and go home to do that. And they dressed me in a costume, and I went out. They told me that they were probably going to have me do that. And I went in. They did the whole thing. They did my hair. I had the whole costume on, and I sat around for 8 hours until Roland had a chance to look at me. He looked at me for 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, and said, "That's fine." And then I left. And then I had the part then, but I know I was there for 8 hours that day, just sitting in costume, waiting for him to decide whether that would work or not. So wow. I became Mrs. Billings. That's the only thing I had. I found these. These were the tickets that they gave you to pick up your costume and your weapons, and I didn't have a weapon, but any kind of you had all these to get into makeup, and I think this is the only thing I have left of that was all these little tickets that have Mrs. Billings on there, and that was the only name I had. And when I got out to the set, they were sitting there doing this scene. Leon Rippey was there, and we were getting ready to do the scene, and Dean Devlin was sitting beside Roland Emmerich at the camera. I mean, the camera was right there, and he said they were talking about something, and he came up to me and said, "We have given you a name. You're not just Mrs. Billings. Your first name is Martha." So right there on the set, I became Martha Billings instead of just Mrs. Billings. And Dean Devlin was so excited because I had a name. And I said, "Oh, please just give me a line. Then I can get SAG wages."
Oh, yeah.
No such luck, huh, Glenda?
No such luck. I was what they called a featured extra. So, gosh, I'm trying to remember what. I think that I worked several days. And I think what it was $114 or $100 and something if you were just an extra. But as a featured extra, they paid me $800 and something a day, I think.
Wow.
You know, the little boy, the little redhead boy that was my son, he had a line, and his mother didn't realize that he should have been being paid SAG wages until somebody on set told her that. And I think he was 7. And so she went and she told me they're probably never going to cast him in anything again. But she went out there and talked to the right people and fought for it. And because he had a line, the little boy got paid $25,000. And that was, he said that was his college fund. Because she told me that's what we're going to do. She said he may never do this again. And she said after the fuss I've made, they probably won't cast him again.
They were very, very generous with their budgets and their money, you know, because just with, in my situation, when I went to interview, I was given a $5,000 budget just to cook 3 meals. So that was for the food. That was not paying me. That was the cost of the food. So,
yeah, I got to somehow, instead of eating with the extras, which the food wasn't nearly as good, I got to eat with all the main people in the movie, and they had really good food.
They had a chef, right?
Yeah, what the extras ate wasn't all that great. Did you ever get to eat with the actual actors, John, or did you?
No, I didn't eat with anybody but the extras. But
I ate with them at Brattonsville. I mean, ate with the staff, which included the actors. And I'll never forget, they had grilled mahi or something like that. I'm like, what? Are you serious? It was so impressive. And I remember Dean Devlin. I mean, just because I was part of the staff, I got to meet these people, and, you know, they would introduce you. And Dean struck me as like the Hollywood producer type. I don't know about you, Glenda, but he felt like, you know, like he was the man, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he exuded a confidence, and he was very friendly, but you didn't feel like you were being handled like but he could push you aside easily, you know, and be on to the next person. So yeah, they ate good, but I ate the extra stuff too, and that wasn't, I mean, it was sustenance.
I never ate with them. I was invited when Donnie and I went down to the Southport location, but we didn't stay to eat. That was the day I had delivered some food. So, but it was very, very impressive when we were down there. To go back to your thing about the corn, Ed, I did not realize that they had corn plants there, but when we were down there, the fields of corn were up. That was a scene that they had with the little children running through it. The most beautiful pumpkins. And we were never able to grow pumpkins, but somehow or another they grew pumpkins. And they brought in oleanders in 3-gallon pots. They were everywhere. And I just thought they were so beautiful because oleanders don't do well in this part of the country. You know, they had camouflage netting in the trees to imitate the dapple sunlight. They had cadavers everywhere. They had just finished doing a battle scene. After looking at all the cadavers and man and beast, I didn't have too good of an appetite to join. But it was really realistic, you know.
Well, Nancy, you were telling me that on the phone last week that some of your food got the royal treatment, so to speak, with the pot they put it in, the bowl.
Well, what had happened, Zach, was when I went for my interview, I was told that food was going to be a very vital part of this movie. I was sort of disappointed because they cut most of the family scenes when they were sitting around the table eating my food because they wanted to do the battle scenes. And of course I understood because this was a fight for liberty and the movie had run so long. But one of the meals that they did have was Cornwallis's meal, and he had told me how vital it was. So he told me, I want you to do duck, and I want you to do ham, I want you to bake a salad lung, I want you to do apple dumplings, and he named several other things straight out of the Williamsburg cookbook. And I told my husband, I said, this doesn't seem logical to me because they were at battle, they were traveling, they needed to eat off the land. And so I told Donnie, I said, we need to do something. And so we decided we would do turnip greens and sweet potatoes, which were not asked for. And they were going to come pick up the meal at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, to go backwards, Cornwallis supposedly traveled with his dishes, he traveled with his cook, and he traveled with a collapsible bake oven. I found out that they had sent a group to England to replicate Cornwallis's dishes. And I was told that $10,000 for this particular bowl. I tried to get the director to give it to me, and between peals of laughter, I took that as a no. But anyway, I was told it was $10,000. But when the movie was filmed, if you will look at it, Donnie's turnip greens are in the $10,000 bowl. The salad lung and the beef brisket and the ham and the apple dumplings and all this other stuff is pushed to the back. And right behind the turnip greens are Donnie's sweet potatoes. So I thought that was a fun, thing to remember. So,
Not many people get to have their food served in a $10,000 bowl, Nancy Craig.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. It was quite a beautiful bowl. It's a footed bowl that y'all would, see in the movie. Then another fun thing, I had cooked all of this food. They wanted all these rustic breads. They wanted pies. They wanted the cakes. I was actually bought a freezer, and it was out at Bundle's warehouse, and for me to put my breads and cakes and pies in, not the casserole dishes or anything else like that I baked for 3 months and carried things, out there to put in the freezer. But one night we were sitting eating dinner, and Victor called me and he says, Nancy, do you have a tea set? And I said, yes, I do have a tea set. I said, I have a blue book tea set, which was, historically correct because that was the pattern that had come over from England and is still very popular today. He said, bring it out here. I'll pay it. It was at nighttime. So Donnie and I got in the car and he would go up to Brackensdale at night with my tea set. And he took it back there. And of course, they ended up not using it because the director, Roland, had decided he was not going to refilm that. But what was so interesting about that is they were filming in the Colonel Bratton's house back in the kitchen. And it was hot that night. and they had on the period clothes, of course. But the way they air conditioned the buildings, they had huge ducts that blew in cool air, and the ducts, I could stay, I'm about 5'3", and I could almost stood up in those ducts. But that's how they climatized the buildings, and the cooling unit was way on up halfway to the business center to keep the noise down. But we got to watch the filming of the that particular scene, and it was very interesting. Didn't use my tea set, but hey, it was a fun thing to watch.
Well, I remember on the set at Brattonsville, the thing that just haunts me, I remember so distinctly, is the production guy who was standing in the middle of the road between the streets with this megaphone. I can see him now. And he says, "Rolling." And that it was so exciting. And there was a complete hush. No one spoke, no one moved when they were rolling.
John, earlier we were talking about the buildings and how they were constructed and all that, and you said they were on your land. You saw a whole lot of that. I was just talking about how wonderful the woodwork and stuff was in all of those buildings, and I couldn't remember which ones had everything in it or whether it was just a shell.
If you're talking to me, the house, was everything was in it, just beautiful. The floors were beautiful, I remember. In the church of Pembroke, it was complete. The rest of the Pembroke was just shells from what I can remember. One of the most impressive things I saw was when I was working Georgetown with them, with Charlotte's house. And they had a front on the Charlotte's house, but they burned the front. They make it look, they burned the windows. And they had added that front to it. And I walked in the house, because they sort of, Roland and them knew who I was. And sometimes they gave me extra liberties, although I was also an employee. And I walked in there to see Roland one day for some reason. And I couldn't tell from the time I left the part of the house they had added on and went into the house that was actually there. It was that good. Bob Blackburn built, was head of the construction. It was just unreal what he could build, and it was just flat beautiful. And then it was almost sad to watch it burn. So, but that was just amazing to me.
That's a neat point, John. So I did a commentary recently, it might be released fairly soon, that you can sync up with the film. Joe Mester, our historic preservationist, and Kevin Lynch, the current site director, joined me. And what we did was we watched the film together, and Joe mentioned that. He said that if you note that scene, they only burn the middle part of the building of Aunt Charlotte's house.
Right.
Don't burn the wings, because the wings are part of this historic house that you wouldn't want anywhere close to a flame, but they built this fake facade for the center that they actually did burn down. I understand they had quite a few fire trucks on standby in case it spread to the historic house that was behind that fake facade.
But it's just amazing what they did and how it just looks so different as to what it was, a lot of it.
What happened to all that stuff, John? Did it?
Well, they burnt Mel's house, and then they just, at the end of the movie, they did, put up some forms like they were rebuilding his house. That was the end of the movie when they go build his house.
Was that on your land too, John?
Yeah, that was on our land too. Same spot. It was on the same spot. And some of the lumber we still got. It was the one thing about the lumber. None of it was treated lumber. So it weren't built to last. Of course, they burned Pembroke down. Everything was just a frontage on Pembroke, but the tavern had all four sides, all of the hollow inside. We actually kept the tavern, went in and put support posts in it, and used it for a hay barn for a good many years until about maybe 2 years ago, a windstorm came through and blew the tavern down.
Perfect.
And we had to do away with the wood shingles on it. We actually had to put real shingles on top of it too. So we used to build them for probably 15 years after the movie had been made.
Great.
Fort Carolina, they sort of bombed it at the end of it to make it look like Yorktown and shot it from a different angle. And the tower I wanted to keep, and they refused to let me keep the tower because they had the lookout tower there, and they said it was not stable enough to be left. And so I didn't get to keep the tower because they demanded it be tore down. So
Did they dig a well on your property?
Ma'am?
Did they dig a well on your property?
Oh, they dug 2 wells on
Okay.
where the Pembroke was. They dug on one side of the creek because one of the reasons I told Zach this the other day on the phone. One of the reasons they came to us, well, thanks to Glenda, is because she got in touch with the location guy, got him in touch with us. They originally wanted the spot where a creek ran through the property. So that's supposedly where Mel goes and finds out that the British are coming because the body's floating down the creek. They didn't. That was cut. It was never. It was never used. It's the first time I saw Mel Gibson when they were filming that, because we walked down the creek that day to watch them film, and that was the first time I saw him. But anyway, they put a well in on each side of the property because they had to irrigate the fields because it was a dry, hot summer when they were filming it. And there are whirls of plastic pipe, and we still use some of them that was all through the properties so they could irrigate the crops.
That's fascinating, John. That's so cool. That's everyone involved in the filming that we have on today. You guys have experienced something once in a lifetime. I'm fairly confident to say that who gets to experience stuff like this. This is really cool.
I'll have to tell you, I don't know whether y'all had any experiences or not, but one of my favorite stories to tell about this is when the second time that I came to film, because the first filming where I did where Leon Rippey, John Billings was leaving and he was telling us goodbye and I was walking away with the thing. That was earlier, that was in the summer. And I came back I think it was in November, late October or November, to do the scene where I'm dead, where I'm shot in the back. Well, it was amusing to me, the different unions, because I had the costume on and there was an argument, not really an argument, but a discussion between the costuming people and the makeup people as to who was going to put the blood on the costume. Because basically the blood is makeup, but it was going on a costume. So they had to discuss whether the union who allowed the union to do this. And it was just fascinating to me while I stood there in my costume before they put the blood on. And that happened several times, but it was a chilly day. And of course, the entire scene, I was going to be on the ground. Well, as they were setting up the shots and doing all the scenes, they were so nice to me. They were bringing me something, asking me if I was cold, bringing me something hot to drink, asked me if everything was all right. And then, they set up the scenes. I'd lay down on, they had a thick blanket that I laid down while they set up the shots and marked where I was going to be laying. And then when they got ready to shoot the scene, I laid down on the ground. The little boy, fortunately, he fell asleep because he never would have made it through the thing. He fell asleep, which was really good because I laid down on that ground with my arm up. I was laying on my arm, if you'll remember. And I laid on the ground, not moving for 2.5 hours.
Whoa.
From the point that I laid on the ground, I was a prop. Nobody ever came back to find out if I was okay. Nobody ever came back to see if I was cold. I mean, nobody said a word to me. I was basically a prop, just like anything that was laying out there on the ground. When I finally got up, because it was cold, I could not put my arm down. I mean, my arm was so sore and it was so stiff, I could not put my arm down. It took forever. And, it was like beforehand, everything was great. They were just, I was an important person until I laid on the ground, and then I was just a prop and everybody forgot about me.
Wow.
My goodness.
I remember them as the hardest working people besides farmers or movers, furniture movers I've ever met. I mean, there are some hard working people, and if you do right or you're out. I remember hearing about some people fired, I mean, that I knew because they made a mistake or they weren't attentive to it. Boom, they're gone. Where'd they go? Did you find that too, John?
The only thing I can remember, and it really one of the best things I did was when I went to work with Dan Hyder with the Wagon Master. He asked me to work with him, and super guy. But we were sort of just told not to talk to any of the actors. And
right.
So I just never, you know, so you didn't push the thing unless they talked to you. Now, once a blue moon, Mel Gibson would walk by and, you know, say something to you, and you say whatever, make the correct response and leave them alone. But yeah, I did hear word of that. You had to be very careful, or they could tell you were gone. So yes.
Yeah.
You remember they said that Jason Isaacs, I remember watching him do this too. Because he was such an evil person, he was very worried that all the kids on the set would be afraid of him. So he went out of his way to talk to the kids and to do things with the kids, trying to assure them that he was not this evil person that did that. And also, I noticed that Mel Gibson talked to the kids a whole lot more. He talked to the kids on the set all the time. He didn't talk to any of the adults. He just didn't interact very much with the adults. Didn't you see that, John?
Yeah. He normally, like I say, I spoke very little to him.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and like I was saying, I was told to speak to him when he speaks to you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was told the same, and I happened to walk right by him, and I just exchanged a respectful nod and a glance, you know. I mean, the man's working, right?
Right.
He's concentrating on, I mean, he's got to stay in the game.
My only experience with Mel Gibson was the man had on flip-flops and he did not know what fire ants were. And he sat in a bed of fire ants. He was not a happy camper. I just happened to observe that, and Janice Henry, who was in our gift shop at the time, came rushing out with the first aid kit. But I did not have the honor of doctoring his feet, but I think Janice did.
I did have, amazingly, even though I have red hair, they actually dyed my hair slightly different color red so that it would match the little boys.
Oh, wow.
So I had to go several times for them to dye my hair. And the last time that they did it, this was late in when I was going back in that November time, and I was sitting in the makeup trailer and they were redoing my hair. Well, Mel Gibson comes in and they were putting the extensions in his hair because he didn't have really the long enough hair, so they were putting the extensions in and, you know, putting the little cue in the back. And I was sitting there not really knowing what to do, but they were working on my hair. And then Jason Isaacs comes in and he and Mel Gibson were talking about some scene and they were just going on, and I was sitting there. I said, I'm actually getting my hair done in the same trailer as Mel Gibson.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Did you all meet any of the other actors?
Yeah, there's, let's see, Heath Ledger. I told you the story about Heath Ledger. Did I do this when we were recording, or did I tell you about that?
No, you did. You told us about Heath Ledger getting to look at you.
Yes, that's right.
Oh.
So, in the house, and I was the only actress left there, so I got to stand there while he pretended I was Anne. But I did talk with him a little bit, and Jason Isaacs a little bit, but nothing more, just because we were on set together. And the Mr. Howard, or Anne's father, I talked to him some.
Tell us about Leon Rippey, Glenda, because Leon Rippey, for those of you that don't know, he's from York County, or at least lived in York County for a while. I think he went to Rock Hill High School.
Yeah, I believe he did, and I'm not sure he was. I think he may have been born in Charlotte. First time I met Leon Rippey was in 1983 when they were filming Chiefs in Chester, the three-part miniseries. And that was one of the first things that Leon had done. I just briefly remember meeting him because I worked for Highgate Pictures in the art department that summer, and worked in the actually making curtains and picking out fabric for curtains and all that stuff. So it's just really exciting. But but when he came up, he was my husband in the Patriot, and we hit it off and talked a lot. He'd talk about a lot of things, you know, concerning Rock Hill and York County, and he kept in touch with me for years after filming the Patriot. He'd send me a Christmas card with his family on it, and he actually gave me a script that he was writing for a movie. He wanted me to read it and see what I thought about it because it was set in and around this area. And the name of it was Liver Mush. And I don't really remember a whole lot about the plot of it, but it was only the first few scenes of it. And it was a screenplay. Yeah, I haven't heard from him in a while yet. But.
That's neat. That's fascinating.
The warehouse for all of the props was at Galleria Mall in Brindles. And I was out there quite a bit, but we mentioned earlier about the workmanship and the craftsmanship of all of the items that went in there. It was absolutely mind-boggling. They had the chairs that Mel Gibson sat in at the front. In fact, one of the workers that staff members of Bransville made those, Daryl, but they had cadavers, they had all kinds of beasts out there, they had the slates by the school children, beautiful costumes and hats, pottery and dishes and furniture.
Their costumes were wonderful.
They were, and just rows and rows of the costumes, and everything was just so beautiful. And it was sad that a lot of this wonderful stuff did not show up in the movie because of the battle scenes, but the movie ran so long, hours and hours and hours of filming, and they had to cut it down to two and a half hours. So that saddened me after seeing all the beautiful stuff and all the workmanship out at Brundle's that was not used in the movie or was cut from scenes. Let's just put it that way.
Well, this has been very interesting, guys. Thank you so much. I'm happy to have a final thought. We've been talking for a little over an hour now. I'm happy to go around and get a final thought from each of you, if you like. Maybe a takeaway from your experience with the Patriot. Who would like to go first? I hate to put you on the spot.
I'll go first. Of all the experiences, and it was a lot of fun and a memorable experience that I often think of every once in a while. In the past 20 years, especially with a film student as one of my sons. But probably the most impactful was when I was as a extra as a soldier. It was a scene where the British and the Continental Army are closing at the Battle of Camden. And we would fire at each other. And it sort of kind of seemed real as the explosions in front of us threw up this peat moss, and it stung our eyes. And this incredibly professional British Army moving towards us. And there was a sergeant, a reenactor from New Jersey, saying, as they came towards us, "Steady, boys, steady." And I can still feel the goosebumps right now that time slipped a little bit, where I felt like maybe I was there. Then, wow. Of course, somebody, gives a command over a megaphone and says, "I want you, and you to fall down." Well, I was one of the guys to fall down, right? and the British are approaching us, drumming, and I was about 15 people from the American flag on the left side, and they moved towards us and they walked over us. And I remember that feeling of laying there and looking up and seeing those men in red coats walk over us. And I looked over to the side and I saw that British flag flying. Time slipped again, and I thought, gosh, this must have been what it was like.
Wow, that's fascinating, Ed. Reenactors, I used to reenact. Reenactors get that kind of experience too. You get out of the tent at night and you look around and you don't see any modern technology. All the lights you see are candlelight, and you think,
Felt it, didn't you?
did I shift into a different time period? It really is. If you've never experienced that, it's a very cool feeling. I've only had it once or twice when I was reenacting. It's an awesome experience.
Well, of course, it all ended, with the megaphone.
Sure, it pulls you right out of it, doesn't it?
And this time it was Roland Emmerich, who, because we weren't, like retreating fast enough or, doing something right, that it wasn't what he wanted. And he got on the megaphone, and I'll never forget, he said, "We must bring up the level of acting." And then jabbed us right away. And so we did. Everybody wanted to do right. And so we ran harder. We fell harder. We acted more serious. I mean, you didn't know who would show up on film or not. It really mattered.
That's awesome, Ed. Nancy, Glenda, anybody, you guys got a final thought for us?
With my final thought and what I remember was that I had the 18th century cookbooks, and Victor wanted, everything to be authentic. And I made copies of the original recipes, of which they call receipts at the time, and attached each one of my dishes. Some of the things I cooked at Brattonsville over open hearth, but most of the things I cooked on a gas grill in a Dutch oven in my backyard. So I remember that.
Well, thank you, Nancy Craig. I appreciate that. Glenda, final thought for us?
It was really a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. What I did, because I was doing it in addition to my other job.
Sure.
But it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed doing it. I was one of my majors was theater, so anytime I could be around acting and film or on stage or anything, I'm always seventh heaven. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and learned a lot, and also made connections that helped me. Having connections with South Carolina Film Office, I've worked with them ever since that time period. I mean, for the last 20 years, even when I went to Great Falls, where I'm the director of the Hometown Association, doing economic community development, they've scouted in Great Falls a lot. But it was just having the connections there. It was just a lot of fun. It was a great summer.
Wow. John, final thought?
Well, it was, I'm like Glenda, it was great. People thought as a property owner was the super part, but really the super part was getting inside and being there and watching the way they did, because I had no experience in acting, which Glenda can tell you. But just watching it from the side, because I was there a lot, and I got to see things that redone and redone and redone, and just be there and saw something I had no idea the way it happened, the way it does, and it was just a great experience for me. And I was like Glenda, I was neglecting my work to do that work, but it's an experience I'll never forget. I promise you that.
Well, Nancy Craig, Glenda Coleman, Ed Schultz, John Lewis, thank you guys so much for joining us today, for taking time out of your busy schedule to share some of these very personal, meaningful stories with us about your experience with a very important film that was very meaningful to the people of York and Chester County. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you being here today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you later.